everyone. Welcome to our third Empowered Vintage Voices panel. My name is Jody. I go by Goldie Delight in the vintage community. My pronouns are she, her. I live on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Stolo and Coast Salish people in what has been renamed by colonizers as British Columbia, Canada. I have been involved in the pinup community for over 10 years as a pinup model, pinup pageant producer, host, MC, and event organizer. I'm so happy to be here with this beautiful panel tonight. Empowered Vintage Voices is a group focused on educating people within the vintage community by hosting discussions on anti-racism, LGBTQ2AA, feminism, ableism, cultural appropriation, decolonizing vintage culture, and more. Our vision is to help people take action in their communities and ensure vintage communities are truly inclusive and safe for all. We have an exciting topic for you all tonight. We'll be discussing vintage versus reproduction fashion in the vintage community. We will be dispelling some myths, talking about inclusivity and sizing, and touching on environmental impact. Please welcome to our panel, Christine, the Glamabassador, Bernie Am, Dame Scarlet, Aznable, and Alixis Lupien. And then I'll just get each panelist to introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Christine, also known as the Glamabassador. I currently live in Hawaii, and I have a vintage fashion blog called Chronically Overdressed. I also have a YouTube channel that accompanies that. I have been styling myself in vintage style for almost 30 years now, and although I'm not a part of the pinup community, I'm very happy to be with you guys, and hopefully we can get some information out there. I'm obviously a plus size woman, so I have a lot to say about plus size inclusivity.
Go ahead, Bernie.
Hi, my name is Bernie Ann. Many of my followers know me on my Instagram at Gunnies and Reptiles. I want to acknowledge that I am coming to you from the traditional unceded territory of the Okanagan Silks people, also known as Vernon or North Okanagan region of British Columbia, Canada. I am a huge lover of vintage. I've been wearing vintage for many years, probably most of my life, but heavily collecting for about 21 years now. I am really into like the prairie scene, I guess it's commonly cottage core trend now, although I was cottage before it was core. And I just really enjoy the community. I have been collecting for so long now, and I've just really continued to enjoy pushing the boundaries of the fashions I collect and trying to be as unique and I guess as genuine in my own self as possible. And I guess that's kind of it. I'm not a part of the pinup community per se, but I love pinup fashion, but I just love vintage fashion in general. And I'm really excited for this topic because I don't always make a lot in terms of income. So vintage and thrifting on a budget is my specialty. And we've had some crazy changes over this last couple of years that have, really challenged me and have questioned some of my vintage and shopping morals and ethics. So I'm really excited to talk about that.
Thank you, Bernie. Go ahead, Scarlet.
All right, my name is Dame Scarlet Aznable, but you can call me Scarlet. I'm coming in from Tongva land, also known as Orange County. I'm not too far from Disneyland. My pronouns are she, her. I identify as Asian American, specifically Filipino, and I've been into vintage fashion, vintage aesthetics, and just living in them since I was in high school. And I literally came from work, dress like this, so like I always wear something very retro on my sleeve, no pun intended, almost every day. It's kind of part of my lifestyle, but of course, vintage aesthetics, not vintage values. We all know that. And things I like to do for fun. I enjoy going to theme parks. I enjoy Disney bounding and incorporating a vintage sparkle to it. I enjoy costuming, as you can see in my backdrop here. I have my sewing machine, and I've been an award-winning costumer for the past 10 plus years. So I just really enjoy being creative. Fashion is a great way to express oneself and to just really just show how you're passionate about something. And yeah, fashion is just.
I'm Alexis. I actually own a reproduction company. So I work in the fashion industry. So I kind of have an insight into, that side of the conversation. I'm from Texas. I go by the pronouns of she, her. Where I'm sitting, I'm currently on the Humanos, Kickapoo, Tawakoni, and Wichita land. I've been in the vintage community for about 8 or 9 years, I guess. Just kind of working behind the scenes with mostly clothing. So that's where I'll be lending my voice tonight.
Thank you all so much for being here. I think we have a lovely panel with lots of amazing voices and takes on what is happening within the vintage community in regards to vintage versus reproduction fashion. So to get to the ball rolling, we will start with our first question tonight, and we will stick to the same order of panelists. And our first question tonight is, what are some things you love about vintage fashion?
Oh gosh, that is a very difficult question. I love the way it makes me feel. I feel very comfortable in this style. I definitely am one to, want to look different. I enjoy looking different. I like, not conforming to other people's ideas of what we should look like. So, and vintage style has just kind of always been a part of my life. My mother was into vintage, and that's really where my love of it came from. And yeah, I like the uniqueness of it and the classic style, the classic look. I think it looks amazing on every single person. There's not a style in vintage that doesn't look good on anybody. So I think it's in that aspect, it's very inclusive. But yeah, the main thing is I just love the way that it makes me feel. That's my big thing.
I love that. I think that we probably all feel that way. Scarlet, you're up. Sorry, I meant Bernie. Go ahead, Bernie.
Yeah, I mean, to elaborate on what Christine said, I love the way it makes me feel, right? I think that's something we can all relate to. I love all the different colors, and the patterns are so bright. I'm a very colorful person. I think our fashion says a lot about who we are as people, and I feel like vintage just really represents that out there colorful person, where there are no boundaries. Everything goes, everything can be pushed to its limit. And I love that it brings so many incredible people into, this circle of things. I remember feeling so alone and isolated in my community growing up. And the more I got into vintage, the more I started meeting people who were just these incredible, strong individuals in our community that were just as colorful as I was. And it was just a lot of fun being a part of that community, growing in that community. And just, it's so, it's diverse. It's so diverse, like there's no two vintage styles that are the same. Like I know from being in this really large, very printed, sorry, I'm stuttering. vintage dress community, like the prairie styles, there are many of us women, and not just women, people of all different backgrounds, you know, all of us with the exact same dress and never wear it the same way. So it's so much fun to just really like mix and match and just really like test the boundaries of vintage. And it's just so, so, so diverse in comparison to what I find modern day fashion is. So I really love that. I love to stand out in a crowd, and I just love the colors of it all, the patterns. Like I'm never bored. I always see something I've never ever seen before, and I'm always just wowed by new things in the vintage community all the time. So that's why I love it.
Okay, I guess I'm up next. So what do I like about the vintage? I'm an aesthetics person. I like looking different. I like just expressing myself. And what got me into this aesthetic of dressing for the mid-century and beyond, I love the movie Back to the Future. I wanted to be a part of that enchantment under the sea dance when I saw Marty McFly played Johnny B. Good, and everyone was just having fun on the dance floor. I wanted a poofy petticoat dress like that. I also, Dick Tracy, Evita. I just fell in love with Madonna's wardrobe and her aesthetic when she did that like 1940s, 1930s kind of glamour. And I was like, oh, how do I wear this? How do we integrate this when I grew up? How do I be Breathless Mahoney, you know? And all these movies, The Rocketeer, we had a strong set of like almost a very aesthetic of 1930s, 1940s kind of movies when I was growing up. Who Framed Roger Rabbit, Jessica Rabbit, you remember her. And I'm like, I just loved the style. How do I just integrate that into my life? And in high school, I found out there was a vintage store not too far from me. And I was like, okay, I need this, this, and this. And also growing up, I went to a Catholic school, and all we did was wear school uniforms. And that was just more reason for me to find fashion, to truly express myself. Because when you're wearing a school uniform, you can't really express yourself too much. So in college, I was very loud with my fashion. And even as an adult, being an office lady, I was like, okay, yes, I'm glad I can be at a professional working environment where I can dress like this without any judgment. So it's a lot of fun, and like there's a lot of ways to interpret vintage fashion and vintage style. Like you can be like a gothic pinup, you can like integrate vintage with Disney bounding or fandom bounding. I mean, like right now I'm working on a Sailor Moon inspired 1950s dress. So there's just so much fun and so much versatility to it, and it's really what you make of it.
For me, the things I love about vintage fashion, I fell in love with the silhouettes when I used to watch old black and white movies with my grandmother. Just the way the waist is always nipped in, and then everything else just is like super hourglass. I just love that. Um, and for me, it's kind of like when I create clothing, it's more of like keeping that connectedness with the people that I've cared for, and in my my family and my past. My favorite time periods are the 1950s clothing and 1970s. I love everything about it. And I love especially like the novelty prints of those eras. They're so fun. The nostalgia that comes with it, and especially like 1950s and prior to that, I like the sense of that everything's kind of more handmade or made in small batches, or kind of a little better on the environment, kind of sort of tailored to your specific body, versus nowadays where everything's fast fashion and you buy it for $1 at Walmart and then you throw it away because it sucks anyway. You know what I mean? So that's kind of the things that I like about vintage fashion.
Wonderful. I like vintage fashion too. I have a closet full of vintage fashion that doesn't fit me right now. So as much as I love it, yeah, there are things to be said about it. So my next question is vintage fashion inclusive to all? And what are some ways vintage fashion can become inclusive to all? And we will start with Christine.
Yes and no. I think, I mean, if we're talking about like true vintage items, sure, it's inclusive. I mean, everybody was able to wear what they had in vintage times, that people actually wore them. So items were made for different sizes. I know a lot of people believe that there's just no such thing as plus size true vintage, which is incorrect. It's out there. It's not always readily available. You got to hunt for it, but it is there. So in that aspect, sure, I think it's inclusive. And as far as inclusive to everybody, not just size wise, absolutely. Everybody can fit into vintage. Everybody can wear vintage. Everyone can choose to wear vintage. I truly believe, like I said, that everybody will look good in some sort of vintage style. It's a personal choice. It's a personal confidence that definitely has a lot to do with how you are presenting yourself. If you're not comfortable in an item, like Alexis loves the 70s. 70s are not my style. So if I was wearing a 70s look, I wouldn't feel comfortable. So I don't think I would present it in the right way, and it would look weird for me. And so, but that's not the vintage fashion's fault. That it's including me. It's saying absolutely, please wear me. But as far as size is concerned, yeah, I think we have a lot to work on as far as, obviously with the reproduction, we can't do anything about the sizing of items that have already been created. And in the past, there's nothing we can do about that. Other than, I will say one thing about vintage fashion with plus sizes, and this is just kind of a plea to everybody out there. If you are not plus size and you find a plus size item in a thrift store or at a vintage store, please don't buy it and cut it down to size. Like, please, think about just kind of leaving it there for somebody who actually could wear that item. It was a big thing going around a couple of years ago where a lot of, non plus size women were finding larger sizes and then just, cutting it down to size. And I mean, I certainly don't want to tell anybody not to buy things, but just be mindful of that yes, we are looking for those items as well. And if we can fit into them, fantastic. But as far as reproduction is concerned, yeah, we have a long way to go when it comes to size inclusivity. There are definitely some brands that are doing amazing and they are working really hard to be more size inclusive. But yeah, we can do much, much better with that. And I have a lot to say on that aspect. So I will let some of the others talk for now and we can get back to some of that later.
Yeah, you're up there, Bernie. Thank you.
Yeah, so I would say vintage on its own is really inclusive. Again, it's what you're comfortable wearing. But to be honest about how vintage is being presented today, now through vintage culture, through magazines, through trending hashtags and fashion, where real vintage is being used, that's where I find that that society in the vintage community has kind of made things a little less inclusive. Because like Christine said, back when these things weren't vintage and they were just everyday clothes, everybody was wearing them. It was fully inclusive. But now when I see like fashion magazines where, they're having models and they're wearing vintage and they're promoting vintage, and there's like all of these different vintage trends happening through, I guess, like mass media and what companies want to represent regarding, vintage style now, I do find that I see less people of color in these magazines, less people of color wearing vintage in our vintage communities. And of course, plus size plus size, beautiful, voluptuous individuals also being represented in current vintage culture when it comes to like the fashion industry. That's kind of what I noticed. And so it's like sad to see because vintage was and is for everybody. So when we get into like, high fashion industry and we're seeing less and less of everybody wearing it, it kind of like makes me feel sad that there is some inclusion happening. And that's just kind of like what I noticed. So I think it would be like really great to see, of course, like if you see larger sizes, save them, or don't sell them to be cut down into smaller sizes, of course, like what Christine said, but also to really encourage the fashion industry to be more inclusive in their marketing and advertising. Because even when we see vintage repro in magazines and stuff, we're still seeing a huge number of people not being represented. So from someone on the outside looking in going, well, I like that. Is that something I want to get into? And then seeing the marketing and advertising behind these things and not really being able to relate to any of this marketing or advertising, I think it really like hinders certain types of people and certain groups of people to like feel comfortable being a part of that vintage community. So that's just kind of like what I've noticed. And yeah, I'd like fashion industry to be more inclusive, I think, in general.
In an ideal world, yes, vintage fashion is for everyone. Doesn't matter who you are, wear it, enjoy it, love it. In an ideal world, yeah, it would be great that everyone can have access to vintage fashion and to just really enjoy it. However, the reality is vintage fashion and true vintage, there's been barriers into accessing these types of spaces. In terms of representation, just kind of piggybacking what Bernie had mentioned, when we see these influencers wearing vintage, when we see these Instagram no names that are being shared and curated, it's always the same type of person. And there's not a lot of diversity, not a lot of body diversity, not a lot of melanin diversity. And it's like, okay, so where are the people who look like me wearing this? Last year, summer 2020, a lot of brands were saying, yes, we would like to have more darker skin models. We'd like to have BIPOC models. And okay, dark skin. I have dark skin. Let's reach out to some of these companies since you've mentioned it that you want to do better in hiring models. And then when I reached out to a few known brand names, never got a response back. Performatism at work, you say. So I really think it's very important for brands to mean what they say and to follow up on what they post in their socials, because otherwise it's performative if you say you want XYZ, but not follow through with it. A lot of times when I can say I'm very privileged to live in the greater Los Angeles area where we do have a lot of vintage, a lot of thrift stores in my neck of the woods where I can find for pieces that might fit me that are affordable. Unfortunately, I have like funky body proportions, especially gaining some pandemic pounds. And sometimes just finding something that is like a comfortable 30-inch waist, 37 bust can be a little bit of a challenge, just trying to find for something on the true vintage side. But again, at least I know I live in an area where there is variety in what I can find for true vintage. And let's see if they have any other notes here. But I also notice just also, since I live in Los Angeles, Orange County, we also have Dapper Day, and that's also been a huge community and it's really started like this huge vintage revival in Southern California. And I've also noticed there's been like a lot of markups for true vintage clothing to like, oh wow, that's like almost like close to $200, $300 or something true vintage. Wow. And when I see these markups on all these beautiful dresses, these day dresses, and even some men's jackets, I'm like, wow, that kind of prices out a lot of folks from this. So so when I'm thinking about inclusivity, I'm also thinking about who can afford it, and like if it's also accessible to like just people who live in the area. Because like I said, I come from LA. We have a lot of thrift stores, we have a lot of vintage places, but if I were living in Boston where I used to live, I can name one vintage store, and I would have to go all the way to Salem for that. Not that I have an issue going with Salem, love Salem, but it would be a ways away for me to get to.
So I think I'll start off by talking about like true vintage pieces. I do agree with the other panelists that if you're a thinner person and you find a plus size item, please leave it alone. There might be another plus size person who's looking for an item, because those items for plus size people are kind of hard to come by as it is to begin with. So and then piggybacking off of what Scarlet just said about cost, I've also seen a lot of vintage sellers who will sell plus size items at a marked up price because they know we want it so bad. I get it. The demand is there, but there are fewer items for us to actually purchase. So they mark it up, and I don't like that. I don't think that's fair. But that's just my 2 cents. I did want to touch on that. I do think that vintage clothing as a whole, as its own entity, it is inclusive of everyone, because if you're a person with a body, you can wear the things, right? So, and I love seeing mashups of like the gender bending, and because women don't have to wear women's clothing, men don't have to wear men's clothing, non-binary folks don't have to wear, whatever, like just wear whatever makes you comfortable. There's pieces for everybody. There is something there that'll make you feel like $100. And then I wanted to touch on the reproduction nowadays. For example, I own a reproduction company, so we try our best to be as inclusive as we possibly can. Sizing is a huge issue. I know a couple of years ago, a lot of us were pushing for the top name brands to carry a wider array of sizes, because it was just from like extra small to like 2X. Okay. You know what I mean? How many people are you cutting out of that? How much money are you trying to make here? Like, are you really a business? You know what I mean? So we pushed a couple of companies to expand to 4X, 6X. And I think now a lot of companies are stocking up to like, usually like 6X, I think, if you're worth your salt in the business. And then beyond that, I think, as Bernie Ann was saying, a lot of it has to do with marketing. It's an unfortunate thing that over time, well, I guess it's not over time, it's just the fashion industry has always been this way, but they've always marketed things toward thin people, towards white people. It's hard to want to buy something when you can't see yourself reflected in that thing. I would love to be able to see items on somebody like me, somebody who's plus size, somebody who's brown, maybe somebody who has natural hairstyles, or, you know what I mean? And that's what I try to do my best in is showcasing, black skin, brown skin, because I don't see a whole lot of that happening with the larger pinup companies, or they usually have one person who they have on staff who will model, who is brown skin, which is not my favorite thing, because that leads into other like tokenism, which I'm not crazy about. And then furthering that, pinup and vintage styles nowadays are considered an alternative type of style, just like goth, just like festival wear, et cetera, et cetera. And there's even more issues in the alternative lifestyles with, being inclusive of Black and brown people. So I think that we all need to do a better job of making sure those people feel included and welcome. And I mean, I want all people to spend their money in my shop. You know what I mean? So I will market to everybody. I don't care. But yeah, I think as a whole, obviously clothing is inclusive, but I think with better marketing, better advertising, we can make it even more comfortable for more people.
Absolutely. Excellent points, everyone. So it'll get a little bit repetitive maybe with my next question, but we are going to do all the questions. The next question is, what are some things you love about reproduction fashion? And we will start with Christine.
Oh gosh, so anybody who follows me will know that 90% of my clothing is actually reproduction. And that is mostly because I am plus size, and it's just easier for me to find reproduction clothing than it is to find vintage clothing. So the things that I love about actual reproduction, not retro, I love that a lot of these companies now are really using patterns from the vintage eras. And so they're really looking at the details, they're understanding certain aspects of what makes that garment look vintage. They are starting to really get into the fabrics and understanding that there are certain fabrics that just lay so much nicer, certain cuts of styles that lay different with different fabrics. And a lot of these reproduction companies are finally, like, they're getting it. They're finally understanding that these little details are really important, and it makes the garment so much different. The great thing about a lot of reproduction is that it's really easy to care for. It's much easier to care for usually with reproduction than it is with a vintage garment. I know a lot of the vintage garments that I have, I kind of set them aside for special occasions because I know I'm going to have to launder them differently, or, maybe the seams aren't as as tight as they should be. So I'm, kind of scared to wear them at times. And then in addition to other details, I'm a huge fan of pockets. All of my dresses got to have pockets. And that's something that really wasn't a big thing in, the 1930s and 1940s, unless you had the, the front pockets on, day dresses and stuff like that. So companies being able to add, side pockets and making sure that the pockets are actually, snack worthy. You can stuff some snacks in there if you want. So those little things are really important. And that's what I love to see about these reproduction companies. I do want to kind of backtrack just a little bit and touch on the representation, if you don't mind. I am huge about representation for all, for plus size, for everybody. I myself have been the token plus size girl as a model for many companies, and it is really frustrating when you finally realize that that's what you've been kind of used as. So I totally agree that representation matters. We need to be able to see ourselves in these ad campaigns, in these marketing campaigns. And I think that's where a lot of the influencers and Instagram people, that's actually why I started my blog, was because I wanted to be out there to show, like, I'm plus size, I'm a size 20, and I can still wear these items. And that's where the influencers and Instagram people and people on YouTube, that's where they come into be really important, because even though they're not being paid by the company, they're still representing these people and the clothing on their body. So I think that's really important, and I really encourage more people to do that, even if they're not associated with the actual company themselves. So I love seeing that. I follow a lot of people that kind of put themselves out there in that way. And I really appreciate it, because we all need it. We all need to see the differences and the diversity in our community. So that's my take on that one. I will I will pass the baton now.
That's for you, Bernie. I think you need to maybe unmute.
Oh, can you hear me now? Okay. So one of the things I actually really do love about Repro is the amount of creativity that is happening behind the scenes right now. So many creative and amazing seamstresses are using older patterns to recreate, to redraw in more inclusive sizing. But not only that, there's a level of like being able to like customize, the ability to customize more. So we're seeing things like adjustable straps. We're seeing, you know, more flexible fabrics. We're seeing more pockets. We all love pockets. So and not only that, like these are people who are starting companies. So we are supporting entrepreneurs when we buy from these people, and we're being able to watch this incredible thing happen in the background. And of course, we talk about affordability. So, and that inclusivity in financial status. And over the last couple of years, I've seen things that I would normally buy for, $100 sell for over 1,000. What? And that's great. That's great for the sellers. So, I'm definitely not going to, shame someone when they can make a great sale like that, but I can have a very customizable, one of a kind, very well made, better made than some of my vintage dresses for just a fraction of the price, which is also really awesome. And I love that about Repro. And even like if we're not even just talking about like more high-end Repro, even if we want to go a little bit more into the fast fashion, I'm even finding that fast fashion on the fly isn't, it used to be like one of my moral ethic codes to not go too much into fast fashion, but it's actually been like a really, really great way to pair some of my vintage pieces with fast fashion. And as long as you're, you love it, and you're not just going to throw it in the garbage a week later, like affordability has definitely been a huge influencer. And there are a lot of amazing companies that are just really not just getting into like, size inclusivity in one direction, but I'm also really, really short. And I find with my traditional vintage, I have to cut like a foot off. Not like I don't actually cut a foot off. I have this amazing seamstress who's very careful to balance everything out, but that's a whole different cost all on its own. And I find in the Repro, shopping of things, I can find things that I can just wear immediately. I don't have to worry about a seamstress. It's just kind of ready to go. And I really, really appreciate that. So there's definitely, pros and cons to both. But I've been fortunate to have had some beautiful dresses made from vintage patterns, and some I've been able to share with other people in the community when they didn't fit me, which was awesome too. And I really enjoy that. So I really enjoy the Repro for all of those reasons. And I'm sure as we see like the world around us change, there will be more pros and cons to both sides. I find that they're forever changing, and what I once thought was, this straight and narrow line is now this really flexible thing that I'm starting to learn as, times continually change. So yeah, I'll pass the baton.
Yes, what do I like about Repro fashion? Well, starters, I can easily find things in my size, and I can also find things that fit certain aesthetics that I like. Some days, like, okay, maybe I want to do vintage, dark academia, or maybe I feel a little bit more on the gothy side, or maybe I feel like I'm more on the geeky side. I can find something that kind of matches what I'm looking for if I'm looking at the various Repro companies that I usually frequent. I can find aesthetics I enjoy, and a lot of modern sizes, for the most part, at least from what I've seen, are also kept in mind. I feel like there's a variety of reproduction brands that cater to all types of budgets, and I like the fact that like I'm on the mailing list on some of my favorite Repro brands, so I know when there's a sale going on, and that also really helps me if I'm on a budget. If I want to like grab a couple of things, I know example Tatiana Boutique is very great with having sales, so this dress is from Tatiana Boutique, full disclosure. So like I always like to see when they have like sales to make things easier to afford and easier to build a wardrobe. Because when I moved from Boston to Los Angeles, unfortunately I had to like ditch and just give my a lot of my wardrobe to thrift stores and to Goodwill, because like there was a lot I could take with me to Los Angeles when I moved out here. So I was like, okay, how do I restart my wardrobe? And I was able to research and just find just different ways to just kind of build a very vintage aesthetic kind of wardrobe on me. I also like the fact that reproduction companies, that they've also fostered like their own communities within their brand. So for example, one of the places where I like to shop, Heart of Haute, they have a Facebook group called Heart of Haute Honeys. And this is a great place where they can do Facebook live streams. They can announce what dresses are coming up. They could talk about prints, and you're building community and just building like a lot of interaction with your customer base. And I think that's great when you have a small business that really cares about their customer base, that you can have these kind of conversations. And then when they were asking like, hey, we have like this cat themed dress that we want to do, but we want to get some feedback from you all to find out what colorway should we do next. I'm like, can we do purple? Can we do purple? We don't see a lot of purple in Repro. So they ended up doing a purple colorway of the cat dress. And you all can also just communicate with the designer, with the people who work for the brand, to talk about like, hey, I have a question about sizing here. I'm in between sizes. Can you give me more insight if it's going to be stretchy, if it's going to be a tighter fit, if I had to size up, size down? So you can also have that personalized interaction with the people who work for the brand themselves. And it really builds a relationship between you and the brand, because that way that it shows that like, yeah, like you're kind of part of like this brand family. And also I'm also part of Gertie's pattern. I have this with me right now. I'm part of their sewing community, and I'm a huge fan of their patterns. Again, I'm a seamstress, and all of us are just like building this community where we're helping each other, like figuring out how to sew, what kind of a fabric is out there that we can use to make our dresses, and just really inspiring one another. And we're learning from one another, like just how to like replicate vintage inspired dresses that we can wear on a daily basis or for a special occasion. So that's something I really like about reproduction brands, is the fact that it's fostering this kind of community, this relationship with the customer base that's very unfounded by a lot of major brands. And this is why I just really feel a lot more loyalty in supporting small businesses like these that really care about their customer base. And also, to reiterate from everyone on the panel so far, pockets are a must. I appreciate a lot of these reproduction brands having pockets that fit my iPhone and my keys. Very much appreciate it. All right, next.
So yeah, I definitely agree. Pockets are everything. Also, it is really important, like Scarlett was saying, for companies to build relationships with their customer base. And it's super cool that since the vintage community is kind of in this alternative fashion side of the industry, it is a little smaller than, say, if you were just to go to Target and buy something off the rack there. Here, you know, we have a lot of smaller businesses, small business owners who are able to actually reach out and talk to the people that are buying from them, so they can figure out, what is it that you want to see next? You know, what is it that you need from me? Do you need more solids? Do you need more prints? Do you need more staple pieces? You know, so that does make like the reproduction clothing super awesome. And beyond that, for me personally, I love taking the vintage aesthetic and pulling it into the modern day and doing like mashups of things, or making nerdy things with them. I'm a huge Harry Potter nerd. So like once a year, I always end up making something that's like Harry Potter inspired, but with this vintage silhouette, which I just love it. But I've seen a lot of Star Wars things and Doctor Who things and Star Trek things. And I love all of the nerdy mashups. It just makes me so happy. And beyond that, like the customization, like Bernie was saying, I love that since the companies a lot of the times are very small, you can reach out to them for small customizations. For example, shortening a hem or making a dress a little longer if you're super leggy, you know, or even just if you have a little bit of mismatched proportions, which aren't really mismatched because, I mean, it's a human body. If you have, you know, proportions that aren't generally sold off the rack, you can have those things customized for you. My company in particular, we don't charge extra for customizations. I feel like that's the way it should be. You know, you should kind of factor that into your pricing because all bodies are different and all bodies are good. So, you know, I do like that we're able to cater to all bodies more often than just, you know, off the rack or even true vintage items.
Yes, wonderful. I love reproduction too. I'm wearing a fabulous dress tonight. I'm going to show you all. It's got pockets. You might recognize it. Yeah, pockets are everything. So our next question is, just checking my notes here. Is reproduction fashion inclusive to all? And how can reproduction fashion brands become more inclusive?
Okay, so I mean, the answer, yes, it is inclusive to all. If you have a body, you can wear it. But there is, I mean, I'm only going to speak on the size inclusivity because that's the only thing that I really have a right to speak on. And absolutely not. It is not size inclusive on the whole for most reproduction brands. And it's unfortunate, but that's, you know, just kind of the way things are right now. I have been working, I know Alexis, you have also been working very hard on this to include, to get more companies to understand that, you know, we are out there, plus size women are out there, we have money to spend, we want to spend it with you. So yeah, it is unfortunate. I don't really know the answer other than just being as loud as possible and just constantly talking about it. I have had many conversations with plus size or with reproduction companies about their size inclusivity. And I mean, I did a whole video about this a couple of months ago, and I mean, I can't even begin to tell you the horrible things that some of these companies have said to me, as far as, you know, fat people don't spend money. You know, there's just no market for plus size clothes in vintage reproduction. It's too difficult. It's too, you know, it's too costly. And same thing with like the customizations, a lot of reproduction companies will upcharge for plus size instead of just taking that into account. Of course, yeah, there's going to be some extra fabric, but you know, the difference between an extra small and a large or extra large, there's extra fabric there too. So I understand plus size bodies are shaped different. Our proportions are different. Things squish very differently on plus size bodies. So when you're making a waist measurement and a hip measurement, I understand that it is going to, it's not as easy as just adding inches to from a large up to a 2X, 3X, 4X. It's not, I know that that's not the way it works. Our bodies are just proportioned different. A lot of us carry our weight in different ways. But again, reaching out to your community, reaching out to your customers is really important. Finding out what we want, what is more important to us, how we carry our weight. I had a big thing with trousers. I have not been able to find trousers that fit my plus size frame because the majority of reproduction trousers are a flat front, the kind of like sailor type trousers. And, you know, for somebody who carries a lot of weight in the tummy area, that is a horrible look. It's not good. But pleats and a front zip looks amazing, looks fantastic. But that's not really a look or a style that most straight size women want. So Emmy Design is really the only one that has come out with something like that. And they, in their recent collection, I think they're called like the grandpa pants or something like that. And they're much looser. They have some pleats. They're fabulous. They are absolutely fabulous. They're super comfortable and they fit. And I mean, they look amazing on straight size women too. I don't know why that's, you know, not a big thing for everybody, but anyway. So yeah, there is definitely room for improvement when it comes to inclusivity. And it all goes back to also the marketing and the representation, because one of the things that I've been told is, you know, from companies that are like, oh, well, you know, well, we offered plus size, but nobody bought it. And I would always come to them and say, yeah, but did you tell us? Did you tell us that you offered these sizes? Because if we don't know, we're not going to go try and seek it out on a constant basis when it's not there. We need to be told, you need to market to us. You need to say like, hey, guess what? We're doing this now. And yeah, it's going to take some time. But there's a couple of brands that are actually doing something which I find really interesting and I'm very excited about. And that's kind of the pre-order type thing. Revival Retro is doing this now for all of their plus sizes. And a lot of it's their in-house brand. And I believe they go up to, I want to say they go up to like a 4X in their sizing now. And what this does is it cuts down on, you know, on waste. So they're only making what they're selling. A lot of companies have this issue where they'll buy a bunch of plus sizes, they'll get some made, they won't market it properly. So then they have all this stock sitting in their storeroom, and then they get upset and then they have to sell it off at, you know, really, really cheap prices. So this is a great way to do that. House of Foxy was doing something similar to this. It was kind of pre-COVID and like right in the middle of COVID. I don't think they're doing it anymore, but it's a similar thing for their plus sizes where there were you were able to pre-order your size. I mean, the downfall is you got to wait a couple of months for it to happen. But if this is a continuous thing, if they're starting to see that, yeah, we are going to spend money, we do want these things, we are going to photograph ourselves and put ourselves on Instagram showing you that, yes, we're wearing this, the word's going to get out, and it's going to be much more beneficial to the company. And, you know, people are going to see and understand that, you know, these look fantastic. These garments look fantastic on a plus size body. And it cuts down on waste because you're only making what you're selling. You don't have this extra stuff that you're, lying around. So, but yeah, there is a lot more work that needs to be done on the plus size inclusivity in general, for both the manufacturing and for representation. So yeah. Next.
Okay. You know, when it comes to repro, I think, like with a lot of the fashion industry, that inclusivity or lack thereof really is in the representation and marketing and advertising. I know for me, one of the things that I'd really like to see in marketing and advertising is realism. I want to see realism in ads. I want to see realism in the people. Like, you know, often being like, vintage or cottagecore or pinup, and you see a lot of these photos in advertising, and they're very fantasy and whimsical. And I think, why can't we see real people wearing these clothes, wearing these fashions in real everyday life situations, doing real things, working people wearing these fashions, and it's not always this big whimsical or fantasy elaborate, advertisement, and just the amount of like photo touching that happens in a lot of advertising is something that has always like been an issue for me, because every body is beautiful. It doesn't matter your freckles. It doesn't matter if you dye your hair or you don't dye your hair, or you have those wispy little grays coming in, or maybe you have that cute little birthmark, that you can't cover up. And why are those things not beautiful? They should be. Why are we so over photo touching? And I find that in a lot of these particular styles, there's this element of perfect advertising that it's hard to like relate. And sometimes it's like, oh, I can't live up to that. I really like that. That's nice, but I can't see that being real. And I want to see it as being real. We're all here. We're all living proof that we are real people wearing these clothes in everyday situations, but it can be very like off-putting for a lot of people who maybe aren't quite there yet. And so it really just comes down to like being real in marketing and advertising for me is where I'd like to see that inclusivity. And I can't speak on relate to, but I can say that when I see a lot of advertising, I see the same types of people in all the ads. They say that they sell plus size clothing, as mentioned earlier, but you never actually see those models, or you just see like a certain type of person in the same ads over and over and over again. And I think the other thing I'd really like to see is maybe some more standardized sizing for that inclusivity. Like I've ordered things. My best friend, she's absolutely one of the most amazing people. She's a very voluptuous woman, the most gorgeous woman you'll ever meet in your life. She's fabulous. I've bought things for her in her size. They come and they're not much bigger than a size that would fit me. And I'm like, what? That's what? And I get really confused. So I think it would be nice to see in this day and age like a little bit more standardized sizing and like just some more realistic measurements, because even like as someone who buys vintage, measurements are like, you can't go by a size. Much different even in the repro world. Different labels do seem to come with their own types of sizing, so it can be pretty like hard to navigate when you're kind of like new to the fashion industry and you're not really sure where to go, and you like something and you want to see yourself wearing it, and I find that it's still very difficult to know exactly where to go and what sizes to pick. And yeah, but that's kind of like how I feel about it, so I'll pass it on to the next person.
Okay, is reproduction fashion inclusive to all? I just really feel it depends from brand to brand. Something we didn't touch on just yet is just some of the beliefs and practices of certain brand owners, because there's some reproduction brands that I refuse to support because their beliefs contradict my right to exist. I won't name the brand name, but about a year ago, there was a brand that I was head over heels for. And when I found out they were posting homophobic rhetoric on their brand page, I was like, okay, I'm out. Clearly, the designer, they didn't want me to exist, and I don't need to be giving them any further money. And when I see that these folks who run these brands have beliefs that just contradict minorities, marginalized folks' right to exist, I'm like, okay, I don't need to be giving my money to you, because as I mentioned earlier, I like the vintage aesthetic, but I don't need vintage values from way back when to be embedded in the fashion that I wear. So when we talk about inclusivity, I want to also be supporting brands and designers that are truly inclusive to all types of folks, and that they do care about their customer base, not just their personal needs, but also just serving their right to live and understanding and supporting their right to exist. Because past couple of years for marginalized folks has been really rough, and we're also starting to see people's true colors, and the past couple of years has been very much a testament to that. So I'm very much of the belief is just know the type of people you're supporting, and know where your dollar is going. Like, even though, yes, we like to support people who are running a small business, but I also don't want to be giving money to folks that don't believe in my right to exist, or the rights or marginalized folks and whatnot. Also, something we didn't touch upon here is, I know we were talking about fashion as in clothes, but I also include makeup in reproduction fashion, because there are makeup companies that I do like, but I would like to see them like, okay, let's see what it looks like on a darker skin tone. What does it look like for someone who is tan? What does it look for someone who has an olive skin tone? Because for a lot of makeup brands that delve into recreating like a lot of vintage mid-century kind of a makeup, a lot of them don't really include a lot of skin tones when they're making example powders, foundations. And I'd like to see what a certain red looks like on a skin tone, because I have, just speaking as someone who is on a darker, like somewhat tan, kind of like in between, like I don't really see a lot of makeup representation with my skin tone. So I just want to see what it looks like before I buy, because with a lot of these brands exist online, and I can't exactly go to a Sephora and like just test it out on my skin. And even nowadays, like especially with COVID, you can't really go into a makeup store and like just do the testing on you just to figure out like, oh, how does it look like on me? And like, I would like to see a lot more of these makeup brands show different skin tones and just what it looks like. So just a couple of just adding my 2 cents to the conversation when we're thinking about inclusivity and when we're thinking about representation.
Yeah, I wanted to touch back on something that Christine said earlier about obviously marketing is a huge issue with the reproduction fashion side of the house. And it's interesting how companies will say that they have carried plus sizes, but that they no longer do because nobody buys them, blah, blah, blah. But like she mentioned before, it's nobody knew you were carrying those sizes because you didn't say so. You know, if the only thing you're showing me in photo after photo after photo is a size 0, I'm kind of gonna get the idea that you don't know, how she said before, it's not just adding an extra inch or 2 on the side or in the back. You got to take into account the entire body and the shapes that you're dealing with. And it really just all just boils down to marketing. Like, you got to market to the people you're trying to sell. You know, if I can't see, if the only thing I'm seeing is a dress on a very thin person, I'm not going to get a good idea of what that's going to look like on me. You know, I need to see it on a different array of people so that I know exactly how it looks on a person with larger breasts, a bigger butt, you know, or thicker arms. I have huge arms. Like, arms are huge for me. Armholes are always this big. And I'm like, I can fit everywhere else, but not my arms. You know, I just need to know that I'm going to be able to fit in all of it, because they don't provide measurements for every little, you know, piece of the garment. They only provide the bust and the waist and the hip, which is standard, and I get it. But if that's the case, then you got to show me more pictures of what's going on. I know about a year ago, I had contacted a very big lingerie company about, they carried the plus sizes, but I just asked a very basic question. Hey, can I see this on a plus size person around, you know, whatever bra size I was wearing at the time, and they jumped on me. They said, how dare you say that? We have plus size people on our website all the time, blah, blah, blah. But when you're talking about having plus size people on your website, and then the only thing you go up to is a 32-inch waist, okay, I guess technically in the industry that's plus size, but that's not really what I'm getting at here. You know what I mean? Because a plus size is like a 32-inch waist is what, like a large, basically, like, come on. So yeah, so I just feel like if you want to involve more people, if you want more people to buy your stuff, you got to show those people that your clothes are for them too. I try to do that myself. I try to show a very wide array of bodies, skin tones, because like I said before, if you don't show different skin tones, people aren't going to know that those clothes are for them. You want people to feel welcome. You want them to feel the warm fuzzies when they see your stuff. You want them to think that it could be beautiful on them as well as the person sitting to your left. I do think that we're getting better at being more inclusive. I think that since people are finding their voices online and starting to tell companies, hey, what is the deal? Companies are finally starting to wake up a little bit and say, oh, well, I just missed out on that $50 there or that $100 there. Maybe I should get with the program. Like everybody needs clothes, So I think we're getting better, but that by no means means to stop. If you want to see something from a company, you need to let them know, because sometimes all it takes is just kind of like a little wake-up call for them, because they get so ingrained in the day-to-day that they don't think about how to expand, their sizing or their inclusivity. They get caught in those patterns of just doing it and getting it out there. So they should do a better job of that, mind you. Like they should have a team or somebody to remind them, hey, maybe we should be doing this better or this differently. But at the end of the day, if you want to see something from a company, you need to tell them, you need to spread the word, just get it out there so that you're in their face and that they know.
Definitely. And I wanted to just take a special moment and thank Scarlet for touching on those points for us. So important to go there with this discussion. And I'm really sorry that happened to you. It's not fair and it's not inclusive. And I'm really proud of you for speaking on that, because I know that's a vulnerable spot for you. So thank you for sharing that. Our next question is, what are some social and economic barriers to buying vintage or reproduction fashion? And how do we break those barriers down so that they do not keep people out of the community?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Yeah, so I mean, Alexis touched on this a little bit as far as vintage is concerned, where people are hiking up prices for plus size, or for even like, I'm so tired of hearing the word rare when I see the same items over and over again. They're not terribly rare, but yeah, I mean, there's this within vintage, whether it's an online seller, a vintage shop, a thrift store. I mean, thrift stores are a little bit different. You can, you're not going to get overcharged too much in a thrift store. But generally with online sellers and vintage stores, it's their perception of what this is going to cost. They take into consideration, obviously, what they need to make money, to make a living. And that definitely needs to be taken into consideration. I know a lot of vintage sellers spend hours upon hours upon hours scouring through thrift stores and all these other places to find this item. So that's part of what you're paying for, is their time and their expertise on finding this item. So just because it's a vintage seller doesn't mean that it's going to be a thrift store price. But vintage sellers also need to understand that, especially now, with this economic downturn, it seems as though, they're actually raising their prices, which is really strange to me. And I mean, I get it on the level of they need to make money. that's their job. That's what they do for a living. And, we weren't shopping as much in the last year and a half. I get that. And so maybe they think that by raising their prices, that's going to help, help offset their, tell you right now, there's a particular brand I'm not going to, that has drastically increased their prices in the last, I'd say probably in the last 6 months to a year. And I mean, where I would be able to buy a, just typical day dress for, I don't know, like $90 to $100. And now that same style, same dress would now cost me, I think the last time I did the conversion, because it's a UK company, is $220. Yeah. And this is just for, their standard cotton day dress. And it's a wonderful dress. I love it. I have several of them. But for $220, if I can find something in vintage that's the same price, that just doesn't seem right to me. And I understand that there's so many factors that go into what a reproduction company is going to charge. Where their garments are being made, how much the fabric and the materials are costing, shipping, anything like that. I get that. And especially I do feel for the people in UK, because with Brexit, they're now hit with a bunch of other, fees and all that stuff. And I understand that cost is going to be, given to the customer at some point. But that's a pretty big price jump in my mind, in such a short amount of time. So on the vintage side of things, I can ask sellers till I'm blue in the face to just be mindful. But the fact of the matter is that when they ask for a price that is exorbitant, they're going to get it sooner or later. They're going to get it. And that just encouragement. So I don't see that changing really, unless someone really just grows a conscience and says, you know what, I can't do this. This is not fair to, to be charging this much money for a dress that, I don't know, I found for $2 or whatever. I don't know. But as it is 2021, and my preferred eras are 1930s, 1940s. The amount of items that are still available from that time is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. As our vintage community grows and there's more people actually buying those clothes, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. Even that. Not even to take into consideration of the time frame. They're getting more fragile. The 1930s stuff is getting incredibly fragile. So, and a lot of people are, they're raising their prices because of that, because they know that it's getting rarer, it's harder to find. So on the vintage side of things, I really don't know what the answer is there, aside from the community again speaking out and just saying like, look, this is unsustainable for us as a community. But yeah, there's always going to be people who can afford those, $300, $400, $500 skirts, the border print skirts. I just saw one sell for supposedly a rare one, which is the third one I've seen this week, for $850 for, a border print skirt. Yeah. And, everybody in the group was like, oh my God, that's ridiculous, but it sold. Somebody bought it. So that's the thing, there's always going to be somebody out there who's willing to pay that much. And it's unfortunate for us that can't afford that. But you know, we're not entitled to have that as a you know, as an option. So it's kind of the same thing with the reproduction is like I'm no longer buying from this company because their prices are just too high. I can't. And I don't know if that's going to make a difference at all. I mean, my couple $100 here and there, not spending with them is probably not going to make a difference. But you know, the thing with the higher price, it's like, yes, we want quality. We want good quality items. We want those details. We want the pockets. We want the customization. We want all of these things. And yeah, we're going to have to pay for that. We want to make sure that the items that we're buying are lasting us a really long time, because none of us are into fast fashion. We don't want to buy something that we're just going to have and wear a couple of times and it's going to fall apart and then we have to throw it away. So yeah, there has to be that sweet spot of where you are comfortable spending a little bit extra because you know it's a good, high quality product, and you're going to have it for a long time, and that you're comfortable spending that much. And of course, everybody is different. Everybody's limit is going to be different. What they're willing to pay is going to be different. So unfortunately, I don't have an answer for you as far as, you know, what we can do to make that difference, other than just being vocal. And, you know, if it does get to a point where the prices are just too high, and we just need to be vocal and say, hey, look, you know what, this is not sustainable for the majority of your clientele. And eventually they'll get the hint and hopefully make some changes on their end. So that's my 2 cents.
So I'm going to talk more on the actual vintage side of things. I can't speak a lot on Repro, other than there are quite a few like people in the vintage community I know who are designing their own things, and they're super incredible to work with people of all different financial situations. And that's been a really, really positive thing, being able to connect with their audiences. So that's a way designers and recreators can kind of help financially with their customers, because most of them are actually like, yeah, no, I can work with you. We can do layaway payments. And that's like the other thing too is, you know, when it comes to like a lot of the labels and styles I buy, I've literally seen in the last year prices go from $200 to up to $2,500 per item. I'm like mind blown. And here's the thing is like most sellers, you know, they work really hard to bring you great pieces. They spend, when they wash those, you are really getting something incredible and you're supporting. But then and most of those sellers, in my experience, have been very like generous to offer things like layaway plans and things like that to make it more inclusive for everyone of all different financial situations in the moments of their lives. But then there's this ugly thing happening right now, and I do really want to talk about it because it has impacted my area of the vintage community, and that is like the scam, pretending an item is what it is. The eBay auctions, these fake bidders to upbid the price of things, this idea that so many, and I've heard it so many times where people have come to me and they're like, I found this great deal on an item and I bought it, and then the seller refunded me because they got a higher deal. No, once an item is sold, it's sold, you know. And so there's this whole ugly, unethical thing going on in the vintage community right now that I really do have to bring up. And if we're going to talk about inclusivity financially, we need to out unethical sellers, and we need to really be reporting things to certain selling platforms where these things are happening. Like, I can't tell you how many times people have come to me and they're like, this was advertised as a gunny sack dress, and I'm coming to you because you know this label. What is this dress? And I'll tell them exactly what it is and why I know that. And just to know that so many people in my community are being scammed or harmed or let down. And so many people have actually left the community and have given up such a beautiful vintage hobby because some of these really, really negative buying and selling trading experiences, because even some of the sellers have dealt with really, really unethical buyers as this vintage trend grows. So it's not just the buyers who are being harmed in these unethical practices, they're sellers too. And that's a whole different story on its own. So I don't really want to get into that because I'd be here forever. But I do think there are incredible sellers out there who are very inclusive and willing to work with people. I know so many people who have been worked with by incredible sellers, but there is that ugly side of things going. And I think if we're going to move forward with inclusivity on a financial level, then we really need to be collectively making it happen, because collectively we can decide a market, we can boycott something, we can all collectively get together and say we're not okay with that. And so long as nobody is participating, people who are doing those unethical practices are likely to fizzle out, or, have the consequences of their actions dealt with through karma or just through legalities. One or the other, one way it's going to hit them. And again, like, that's a big topic, but it is something I felt like needed to bring up because it has harmed my vintage community a lot. And it's made me really sad to see so many people go through these scams, both sellers and buyers alike. It's been really disappointing. So I think we need to band collectively together to prevent these things from happening and to speak up when these things are happening, and to try and just make the vintage community, the buying and selling and trading of it, just more safe. And that's something that is going to take a collective effort. It's not anything that one person can do on their own. And that's kind of where I have to go with that. So I'll pass it on to Scarlet, I believe.
Yes, it's me. To just add my 2 cents to the question. I think pricing is going to be very varies from brand to brand. And like I said earlier, I always wait for sales. I encourage like friends who are kind of like in an economic, if they're a little low on cash, or they really like something and like, oh, hey, this is on sale. So I was like, hey, I'll share it to them like, hey, this is on sale. Check it out. Also, let's see, just kind of also just thinking about also the aspect of how there's been a lot of folks in the vintage community who don't have much money on them. I'm speaking from a place where, like, yes, I have a consistent day job, I have a consistent salary where I can afford an MSRP $150 Repro dress, but I would prefer to have that on sale. But I also know that there is this contingency of people who like vintage fashion or reproduction that want to be a part of it, but don't have the money to spend $150 on a dress, or even can afford it when it's on half off at $70. So a lot of these folks will share like links on Amazon, and these would be like these Chinese fast fashion companies on Amazon that make these vintage inspired repro dresses. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that people from a low income standing will be taking care of these dresses, even though they're fast fashion. It's not people who are from low income that are driving up the fast fashion market and that's causing harm to the environment. It's the folks who are dropping $900 on a company like Shein, wearing it for their Instagram, wearing it for TikTok, and then getting rid of it. Just speaking for myself and just from my experience, just having living with a father-in-law and living with my partner who came from poor backgrounds, a lot of times they'll be shopping at Uniqlo. And Uniqlo, so y'all know, is kind of like Forever 21, but professional clothes, is Japanese based. And the nice thing about Uniqlo is if you feel like you're done with your clothes already, or if you've worn them out, you can take it back to the store and they can recycle it for you, which is great of them. But the point being is, both my father-in-law and my partner, they came from poor backgrounds, and anytime I gift them something from Uniqlo, they're gonna love and cherish it. My father-in-law, he wears his the pajamas that we got him for the holidays. He wears that like almost every day. He loves it. He takes care of it. We got him a jacket for golfing. Loves it. Takes care of it for the past couple of years. And I think it's just important that we don't judge and we don't shame people from low income economic or any economic background for like buying looking up vintage inspired dresses on Amazon, because you don't know what someone's going through or what economic hardships they're facing, especially after the past year or so dealing with COVID. Like, yeah, I know we're hitting some hard times, that sometimes we just need to like just take care of ourselves. And if our way to take care of ourselves is to clothe ourselves, is to make ourselves just kind of feel pretty, even if it's just for like a fleeting moment, even just for like a TikTok video, I think it's just important just not to shame folks who are like on the lower socioeconomic strata for like buying from a thing like Amazon, because there's been a lot of study and a lot of videos done on this, that people from low incomes that will take care of what they have, because to them, that's what they got. And again, just coming from an income level where I can actually afford a $150 dress, I still wait for sales. I still wait for, like, example, Heart of Hope. Sometimes what they'll do is they'll have like this sale where they'll like sell like just some of the dresses that really couldn't make it to main. I'm just trying to figure out what the verbiage is. Basically, there's errors on the outfit, and because I know how to sew, hence my sewing machine in the background, I can go in and I just can repair like a dress that fits me and just repair that for myself, so that doesn't get thrown away. These are usually known as like the sample sale rack. So there's kind of like just some errors on the dresses. Okay, I can fix those errors. I can make them look pretty. I can like add something into it that kind of feels very custom to me. So I can also save that from being like contributing to our carbon footprint. And that's just my 2 cents.
Yeah, that's great. I just want to touch on with this question about being like breaking down barriers from keeping people out of the community within like pageantry. Sometimes there'll be contests where you can only wear true vintage. And that's something that I really think the community needs to look at and not have. It discludes so many people, because not everyone can fit vintage, not everyone can afford vintage. And like you said, not everyone can, afford even like a higher brand reproduction label. I think that with styling and uniqueness, people can buy or make any kind of outfit that would fit a theme for any kind of pageant. So yeah, I think that that's really, really important, that we don't judge people about where they're getting their clothing from, whether it's, I love to see true vintage. I love true vintage. I love the feel of it. I love the look of it. But I also have the same love for so many reproduction dresses. And there's, like I said, pros and cons to each, and yeah, we should never judge. I just wanted to mention that Alexis had to drop out for the rest of the evening, and we are so grateful for her popping in, because we know that she has other things going on in her life that are very, very much more important than this. But her voice in this conversation is so important. So glad that she was able to come for the little bit that she did. We have one last question, and then if everyone, while they're answering this question, wants to take a moment to sort of give their final thoughts, and then we will wrap this up. So our last question is, what kind of environmental and ethical impact does buying vintage or reproduction fashion have? And your final thoughts on that.
Okay, well, I mean, obviously the recycling aspect of wearing true vintage, buying true vintage is very important. And also the preservation of the history of those items is also incredibly important. I think a lot of us within this community are not only in love with the aesthetic, but we honor the history of it. And I think that's a big reason why we hold on to so much and don't resell it ourselves sometimes. But that's okay because it's being loved. We honor the history of it. Sometimes some of us even seek out the history of a garment, and that's really important. And I think that that's a part of the kind of the ecology of these garments. So with the vintage side of things, yes, that is, we're not buying fast fashion, we're not buying brand new items, we are recycling, we're reusing those items. On the reproduction side, the way that I see it, especially with some of the I don't want to just talk about the high end brands because there's a lot of less expensive brands that are doing amazing jobs and they're using amazing materials and they're really long lasting. But I think for the most part, those of us in this community, we want to hold on to our items. We take care of our items. We aren't just throwing them away. And kind of to touch on something that Scarlet had talked about with these brand groups, a lot of these groups have buy, sell, and trade aspects within these groups. And I think that is amazing because we're keeping it within our community, because we know that if I sell an item onto somebody, something that I'm not wearing anymore, maybe it doesn't fit me any longer, I know that that's going to a really good home. I know that that person is going to love it and they're going to wear it. And so it's going to have another life and, hopefully a long life. And then for the most part, if that garment is no longer serving that person is more likely to sell it on to another person within the community. So even if we are buying brand new items from reproduction brands, the chances of those items being sold on, traded, whatever, to other people, it's a pretty high chance that that's going to happen. I sell a bunch of stuff on my Instagram and on my Poshmark whenever I do a closet clean out. And I love seeing that they are getting a new life. It has served me. For the most part, it's not about getting my money back, because I've already spent the money. I've worn the item. I've loved it. It has served me well. Obviously you want to cover certain costs, but I want that item to go on and live another life with somebody else. We love going to thrift stores. We love going to vintage stores and, rifling through stuff. And obviously that is stuff that people have given away. They've not sold it to Goodwill. They've not sold it to Salvation Army. They've given it. So there's so many avenues to do that and to allow that garment to live on again. So even if you are buying solely reproduction or modern clothing that you are styling as a vintage style or a retro style, I think within our community, we all have a very collective mindset of keeping these items, wearing them until they no longer serve us, and then either donating them or selling them on to other people that are going to love it. So even though we're buying things brand new, I think it stays kind of mostly within our community. And those buy, sell, trade groups are an amazing way for people that have a little bit less money to get some really amazing items And I highly recommend, if there is a brand that you like, get onto those groups, because I mean, people sell stuff constantly, or trade. A lot of times, if it's just simply like, hey, I went down a size or I went up a size, I'm looking for something in a different size, and then you can trade. And there's actually there's a couple of like free cycle groups within the vintage community too, of people who just, they're not really interested in selling the stuff, they just want to give it away. You can get stuff from there as well. So there's a lot of options for people who have a little bit less money that want to get into the vintage style. And there's a lot of ways that you can do that. It's going to take some work, but so does thrifting. Thrifting takes a lot of work. So I highly recommend that. And, just kind of my final thoughts are, within our vintage community, we need to continue to have these conversations, not only, here on Empowered Vintage Voices, but just within our groups, for each other. We need to constantly have these communications of, within our community, what is serving us and what isn't, and how can we be better? That's really my big thing this year, is like, how can I do better with everything? And we constantly need to be asking that question, and we need to be asking that question of others as well. And how can we support others to do better? Meaning these companies, these brands that that Scarlet had mentioned that we're not doing better. How can we provide them with the tools? How can we communicate with them that they need to do better, that we need to see changes in them? And I will totally agree that I saw a lot of brands doing not so good things, or just doing nothing at all, really. And there were some that listened and heard and made changes. And that's really important. And then there were others that listened, heard, and said, sorry, not important to us. And we need to understand, we need to hear that, and then make our decisions of where we're going to spend our money and who we're going to support. But yeah, just keep continuing to have these conversations is really important. And listening. That's really what everybody needs to do, is just kind of stop and listen and hear where people are coming from, and how we can support each other. Because I know it's strange to talk about a vintage community, because it's, for the most part, it's online. It's all people all over the world online. But it is something that is, this community is so special to me, and it has been an amazing, huge part of my life and my whole vintage world. And I love it, and I love you all. And thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of this, and to, hear voices. And so, yeah, so thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much for that, Christine. That was wonderful. We'll move on to Bernie next.
So the environmental impacts, like, as it has been touched on a couple times with buy-sell trade groups, that's awesome. I know, I don't have a lot myself, so fast fashion is sometimes that I do sometimes buy. And when I do, as mentioned before, I take really, really good care of it, because it's not like I can just replace it in a week from now if something happened to it. So I think that was a really, really good point. And I'm glad that that was touched on. We often think, a lot of people who are environmentalists and activists in the environmental communities often talk about the negative impact that fast fashion has on our planet. But we often forget that being kind of like a niche hobby and lifestyle, that a lot of our stuff is being shipped all over the place. And that has a carbon footprint of its own to be traveling and mailing and delivering and air flights and boats and yada, 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 how things move around the world. So I think it's safe to say that no matter where you fall, whether you choose to buy true vintage versus reproduction vintage, I think that it kind of balances out when you think about the environmental impact in a lot of ways. I mean, of course, I don't know the exact science of it all, and I'm sure if you went into it, there'd be one that maybe outweighed the other. I'm not sure, but I know for me, I have to pretty much order everything online. And most of what I order is coming from a different country altogether. And I know that that has an environmental impact just to buy true vintage all on its own. So I will have to say that about the environment. I'd like to touch on a couple things that were kind of missed throughout the discussion that I think are kind of important to me, just in terms of like good karma and inclusivity too. Like one of the things that has been a really common thing over the last year I've seen really growing in a lot of vintage groups and fashion groups is when we find things out and about in thrift stores, we think of other people. Like, this isn't something I would buy, but I know someone who would want this, and saying, hey, I found this, and you know, I'm either going to gift it or I'll only sell it to you for what I paid in the thrift store. I know there's a lady in the States who is amazing with some of my shoes that way. It's so hard for me to find small shoes. And she's like, hey, I found these in a thrift store. And just for the cost of shipping and what I paid for the thrift store, I'll send these to you. And I'm like, yes, I love that. So there's definitely ways we can really be having each other's back and still keeping things affordable. I'm always like, I've got this whole closet full of things that are mine. And then I have this separate section of things that I'm like, ooh, this is for everybody else. I know people who would wear this, and I love that. It makes me feel awesome. And I know there's a lot of other people who do that, which is really heartwarming and just a great way to, like, you know, make everyone feel special in the community. The other thing that I wanted to kind of touch on was ageism in advertising. It wasn't really something that was brought up, but as we all know, we all get older. And one of the things that as I slowly, you know, get older, which, you know, I'm only 36, so it's not like I'm like old, but even in advertising, we see either really, really young people who are very trendy and very young, or when we do see older people being advertised, they're still being advertised like these glamorous, grayed, white-haired individuals with, you know, older, very maternal fashions. And I would definitely like to see more people of all different ages even being included in our vintage community. I know a lot of mothers in the vintage community, mothers of teenagers, mothers of young children, mothers whose children are in their 30s and having kids of their own, you know, people of all different ages. But you get to this middle age where you're not really represented on any front. You're either too old or too young, or not old enough or not young enough. It's just like this weird middle ground in like advertising. And one of the things I love is seeing people of all different ages in our vintage community wearing what they love and feeling as good as they feel in it, because there's something truly magical about wearing vintage pieces or reproduction pieces that represent that time, that nostalgia. There's something really magical about it. And then the third thing is just to really give appreciation and gratitude to every one of the panelists here tonight. And of course, to thank you, Jody, our host. I learned a lot that I never really considered, which is awesome, because as someone who is approached a lot in the background privately about what certain items are worth, how should they be priced, I can now actually look at that from a more inclusive perspective and think about how I'm going to answer that question, and think about how my answer might impact a future buyer or even the person asking me advice on it, which is something that I'm really happy to have that insight on, because I think that in itself makes a huge impact, because I do want I do want everyone to be, if I could see every person in my life in vintage, that would just make me so, so happy. But if, you know, if it's a simple difference between this size 13 dress is 600, but the same dress in a size 5 is only 200, well, that is a little ridiculous when you think about it, isn't it? Like that's terrible. So I do have the ability to influence some of those prices for more inclusive shopping and trading. And I'm going to implement that moving forward, because I think that would be a really, really great thing, and a really great thing for sellers to get on board with. So if I can use that power for anything, this has definitely taught me that there is a place for that. So I'm really excited to take those concerns and those thoughts forward into some of the things that I do have the ability to impact. So thank you everyone for sharing those thoughts and that knowledge. I will pass it on.
Thank you for that, Bernie. That was great. I know you personally, and I know you have a big heart and you love your community so much, and you take a lot of time and care to make sure that good practices are happening there. So I really appreciate you coming tonight and joining us. And yeah, we will go to Scarlet.
Okay, what kind of environmental and ethical impact does buying vintage or repro fashion have? I think it's wise to just, in general, just keep in mind what our carbon footprint is, because like, yeah, even when I'm driving to, example, Vixen, I'm still like spending about 2 gallons of gas to get from here to Burbank, just so I can at least try it for myself, and also just kind of acknowledge the privilege I have just being so close to a lot of repro brands, and being in a community where there is a lot of thrifting and a lot of vintage stores that I have access to, that I can touch and feel and try them out for my size, no pun intended. And just also just kind of being cognizant about like, okay, how much do I have in my closet? How much can I have in my closet? And is this going to spark joy for me for the next several years, 10 years down the line? I know I was a poor college student at one point in my 20s, where a lot of my outfits were either from Forever 21 or Goodwill, but I took good care of those clothes. So I'm a very indecisive person when it comes to like looking at like, oh, what clothes I want to buy, what do I want to do this? I can't just have, is that feeling when you look at just look at this brand and they have a new lineup set, like, okay, I want all of them. I realistically, I can't have all of them. Which one of these is going to spark the most joy, and which one of these is going to give me the most joy for many years down the line? Just also just kind of thinking about like not over consuming, just so I don't have, I have a bigger carbon footprint than I already have. Come on, I live in LA. Everyone drives. I just wish we had trains out here, unfortunately. The ethical impact, again, just really being cognizant, even with reproduction brands, just to see who's selling it. Are their do their personal beliefs, political beliefs, do they harm other people? That's just something you got to ask yourself. And again, like I said before, in the past couple of years or so, a lot of these reproduction brands made it clear where they stand on human rights. And a lot of times it's not the answer that's inclusive. So definitely educate yourself and really think about that when you're passing the dollar along. And also just kind of just piggybacking off what Bernie had mentioned earlier, just also just being cognizant of markups, because I've actually seen vendors before the pandemic buy things off Amazon and just marking them up 200%. I'm like, no, that fascinator that I found on Amazon, it's like $5, but then you marked it up for like 50. Really? I've seen this happen too many times. So just kind of just be aware when it happens, because I've just seen that happen so many times where there's just this whoa markup for that. But just kind of having that smart shopper mentality when you're just looking at stuff you want to buy. And just what Marie Kondo once said, does it spark joy? Final thoughts. Thank you again for having me on this panel. I always enjoy talking about these issues. Thank you for giving us a space to talk about this. I felt like I learned a lot. There was a couple things I wasn't aware of, and I had some assumptions coming in, but you know what? I was educated. I learned a lot. I enjoyed listening to all of you just talk about this issue. I know this tends to be a very sensitive issue when it comes to the discussion of vintage versus repro versus fast fashion. I know this can be a very hot topic, but at the end of the day, I just recommend folks to stay educated, stay humble, and just be excellent to each other.
I like that. That should be our catchphrase. That was excellent. Thank you so much, Scarlet. You have been a part of this group and a part of so many of our discussions already, and your commitment to empowered vintage voices is something that we truly are grateful for. And I appreciate you being a part of it. So that's it. That's the end of our discussion for tonight. I want to thank everyone so much for lending your voice to Empowered Vintage Voices, and to everyone that's going to tune in. Please see our links in the description of this video on how you can uplift these voices by donating to our PayPal, Venmo, and Cashapp. All those links will be posted. We believe in paying our panelists for their labor, and if you have found any of our videos helpful, you can let us know. We want to hear your thoughts, your comments. We want this discussion to go further than just this recording. Show them to your communities, share us. We appreciate all of that. Please subscribe, share, follow. You can find us on Facebook, Instagram at Empowered Vintage Voices. And if you'd like to join our panel for one of our upcoming discussions, please leave us a message. We're always looking to expand our panel. We want to have as many different voices as possible a part of this process. And yeah, cheers to everyone for being here tonight. And we will see you all again soon. And record button is right here. See you.